This becomes obvious. The springs that so powerfully move wokism proceed from the most serious errors of our time denounced by Professor Warren Murray. These errors have been promoted into ideologies that do not admit of questioning. Myth of progress, for example, one consequence of prioritizing as the end of reason practical truth, namely efficiency, over speculative truth, namely conformity to objective reality, is to believe in an inexorable progress. Inevitably, one imagines more recent opinions are truer, just as more recent technology is more effective. Modernity builds on this myth of progress. We believe the present necessarily better than the past, and the future inevitably better than the present. Everything ancient and traditional appears as an obstacle to comfort and even to happiness. Certainly, the crassest ignorance is indispensable to establish such a myth. But precisely, the thirst for equality calls for a disdain for excellence, a lowering of the level of education, a discredit of culture and history, because excelling cannot become the lot of all. Curiously, however, the repentance demanded by the woke suggests self-congratulation. According to Alain Finkielkraut, a generation that indulges in repentance actually asserts its moral superiority over previous generations. This repentance is not a mea culpa. It is a brazenly narcissistic and anachronistic practice of memory, refusal to suffer. The better conditions of material life lead to settle here on earth and to forget any supernatural destination. We think we are happy by not suffering and by practicing absolute freedom. The psychological man, Rodrier notes, replaced the religious man. This new man thinks that life is about experimenting until you find your own way. Man no longer conceives of himself as a pilgrim, but as a tourist who explores life according to an itinerary of his own, with the ultimate goal of his personal happiness. Even the Christian lives as if he thought that way. Very few contemporary Christians are willing to suffer for their faith, Dreher adds, because society who trained them admits no benefit to suffering, to the point that the idea of supporting it in the name of truth now seems ridiculous. Relativism and individualism lead to the incessant demand for new rights. Those who are deprived of them awaken new victims. Morality is reversed, as the right to total freedom turns into a right to immorality. Gradually, every moral fault becomes the object of a right, while every natural moral requirement is seen as an attack on the dignity of the free being. The rights claimed in escalation, abortion, suicide, homosexual marriage and adoption, sexual identity, gradually liberate from God, from nature, from all law, and enshrine absolute individual autonomy. The almost universal acceptance of such a deception is surprising only as long as we do not see to what extent man, spoiled by technology, is no longer able to endure the slightest suffering and to renounce the slightest pleasure for a higher cause. Even young practicing Christians do not have the capacity to resist it, because they have been told repeatedly that to succeed in life is to live without suffering. Yet, by making life more comfortable and easy, technology enslaves even more than it liberates. What would not be our powerlessness without electricity, without a computer, without a cell phone? Without the internet, we wouldn't even know what to think. Life spent in total comfort and play makes one accept and love such servitude and confuse it with the freedom to act and think. Father Gibbert rightly notes, surfing the net and juggling with digital is paid for by an enslavement, letting us spy and pump our behavioral surplus so that in the end the GAFAM guide, thanks to the powerful algorithms, our behaviors, but also by bludgeoning and, if necessary, by censorship, shape our thinking and align it little by little with the dominant doxa, the political correctness, the progressivism of woke ideology. And what about the church? Wokism is not limited to attacking Catholic doctrine by opposing it with a different conception of the world and of moral and political action. It disguises itself sufficiently as charity and justice to have its ideology adopted as more in conformity with the Christian faith, and especially more pastoral than the legalism of believers and theologians of hard orthodoxy. The tendency to recognize in all uses of sexuality an already true love capable of moving towards the most desirable ideal has already been pointed out. One can also point out the temptation to regard the sexual abuse of some clerics as systemic in the Catholic Church, and to favor the collective repentance that such a systemic problem requires. A typical woke practice, still, is to look at priestly power as an embodiment of the dominated struggle. The priest oppresses his faithful as a visceral dominant, and the faithful constitute a dominated to awaken. The latter must be encouraged to regain the right of decision that belongs to them properly in the life of the church. Despite a real risk of clericalism among clerics, this view distorts the Christian definition of the priest, which makes him the servant of the faithful, following the example of Christ. The faithful who strive to diminish and distribute priestly power are themselves inhabited by clericalism. They desire much more to appropriate this so-called power than to sanitize the exercise of authority. The same search for power is detected in the desire for diaconate, priesthood, and even the episcopate for women under the pretext of justice.